Hello everyone, and yes, I've returned. I know a lot of you have been getting in touch, and I've done my very best to keep up with you all. However, since then I've completed my previously mentioned master's degree in linguistic aesthetics, and I'm now trying to find the time to return back to my tuition. Please continue to stay in touch, and I'll always get back to you all eventually. Right, this video will concentrate on the Cirth systems. That's Cirth with a C, not a K, despite being spelled with a C. Common mistake, and one made by me in one of my first videos about 2 or 3 years ago. The name Cirth is of Sindrin origin and means runes, and each of the Cirth systems are made up of Cirth, that's spelled with an E, not an I. Confusing, I know. And these are sorted into rows known as Cirthas, very similar to the Tengwar systems that I've covered previously. So just to give you a bit of a background of the Cirth, Tolkien had a very keen interest in Anglo-Saxon culture, which also used a very similar system of written communication. In fact, Tolkien did acknowledge a similarity between his own runes and those that are used in Anglo-Saxon. The system was originally created by Diron, who was the lawmaster of Doriath, and was used to represent Sindarin words for Cinder Elves and the Dwarves. And the first of these alphabets that we'll be looking at today is referred to as the Ancient Cirth. Now, this alphabet doesn't have all of the lettering required to write the words of the Sindarin language that we know from the Lord of the Rings, and thus we assume that it was used for the predecessor language known as Old Sindarin. Now, I won't go into too much detail about the languages themselves, but a quick Google search will give you further information about the history or the antiquities of the Elvish languages. Now, a number of other alphabets followed on from this original set of lettering, including the Cirthas Diron, the Angathas Diron, and the Moria and Ereborian Cirth, which was later in the Third Age. Right, now moving on to the runes themselves. Now, they're created with an initial straight line. This is known as a stem, and have further lines appended to them known as branches. Again, this is very similar to the idea of the Tengwar, but the Cirth was created specifically with straight lines, as unlike the Tengwar, it would have been used to be written on wood, metal or stone, as opposed to Tengwar, which had been written in books. So obviously, if the Cirth had the curvature of the Tengwar, it would have been very difficult to write on naturally occurring materials. Now, very little is known of the Cirth by comparison to the Tengwar or the Serathi, but a starting point is the Appendix E found in The Return of the King, which most of you will probably know if you move in Elvish circles. Further samples are found in the Book of Nasals, among a few others. Further details can be found for those that are interested in Christopher Tolkien's History of Middle-earth series. Right, so we'll now look at the original values of the first Cirth alphabet. The way in which the table is laid out is exactly the same as those I've used in my previous videos. The articulation measures are shown in both axes. You've got the dental, labial, palatal and velar across the top, referring to the parts of the mouth used to articulate the sound, and the mode of articulation down the side, plosives, the fricatives, the nasals and the semivowels. If this has thrown you at this point, then please go back and look at the second part of my video series, which will explain these terms in further detail. Explaining them in every video might get a little bit tedious. So, in the voiceless plosives, we find the dental T, the labial P, and the palatal C or K. And you'll notice that all have branches to the right of the stem. Again, it uses a similar graphical reproduction of the sound as the other systems already covered, and there was no velar plosive used at this point. In the voiced plosives, we find the dental D, the labial B, and the velar G. You'll notice here that these runes are the same as those shown in the voiceless plosive series, with an additional branch. It's therefore assumed that this additional branch adds the voicing to a phoneme. Now, I found this a very good aid to memory when writing scripts using the Cirth myself. Rather than committing each individual shape to memory, it can often be easier to recall the logic behind each of the systems. So, well, that's my way. It might not work for you guys, so don't blame me if it doesn't. Moving on, there weren't any fricatives, voiced or voiceless, in the original Cirth. There were, however, those added to the later systems when it was further expanded over Middle-earth. However, we won't be going to those systems just yet. Right, moving on to the nasals, and here we have the N, the M, and the NG digraph that we find at the end of long or sing. Again, the glyphs are very similar, representing the mode of articulation. And finally, we have the R semivowel. Now, much like the Tengwa, there are the phonemes which don't find their place in this table, and therefore they're written separately. In this alphabet, we have the Z, or Z, and the L, arguably a semivowel, if you prefer, and the S and H. Now, as you can see from the table, these two are interchangeable, meaning that both of the Cirth were found to represent each letter. That is often the case with talking systems, so to ask which should be used for which letter in this case would be futile, as the simple answer would be both, as both were used for both letters in the samples that we have of his work. But remember that they shouldn't be interchangeable in the same script, so choose a value for each one and stick to that one. Next, we have the vowels. These include the E, I, O, and U. The last of which is also used for the letter W. Although we don't have any samples using this association, this is an assumption based on the later versions of the Cirth. Now, you're probably wondering, where has the A vowel got to? And oddly enough, there wasn't an A in the first system, or at least there are no samples which show that the Cirth represents this vowel. And that which followed the original system uses this glyph. So, in the absence of anything else, this is the one that you would use. Right, that should hopefully give you an overview of the Cirth and its origins. There aren't any rules to speak of like those we had in the Tengwa, but I will continue this video series by following up with the other systems that I mentioned in due course. But for now, thank you all very much for watching. Please feel free to comment on the videos and ask questions, and please also join in on my Facebook page. The link I'll put in the description below, and it's also in the profile area. Thank you ever so much for your patience, and again for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Cheers.